I'm reading from Rays of the One Light by Swami Kriyananda based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. This week's reading is titled, Living in the Presence of God. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. In the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 25, we read of a king, capitalized for the references to God, who welcomes certain devotees to the divine consciousness, saying, I was an hungered, and ye gave me meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came unto me. The elect asked him when it was that they had served him in these ways, and the king answered, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. To see God as residing in every human being, as indeed he does, is to open oneself to limitless opportunities for serving him. Yogananda, in Autobiography of a Yogi, described a saint who lived in this consciousness as, quote, the greatest man of humility I ever knew, end quote. He described a seemingly chance encounter with this saint. Another day found me walking alone near the Howrah railroad station. I stood for a moment by a temple, silently criticizing a small group of men with drum and cymbals who were violently reciting a chant. How undevotionally they used the Lord's divine name in mechanical repetition, I reflected. My gaze was astonished by the rapid approach of Master Mahashaya. Sir, I said, how come you here? The saint, ignoring my question, but answering my thought, said, Isn't it true, little sir, that the beloved's name sounds sweet from all lips, ignorant and wise? He passed his arm around me affectionately, and I found myself carried on his magic carpet to the merciful presence. If you would see God, watch for him everywhere. If you would hear his voice, listen for it in all sounds, and also in their supporting silence. If you would know God, seek his wisdom behind merely human knowledge. The Bhagavad Gita states, one who beholds my presence everywhere and all things dwelling equally in me, he never loses loving sight of me, nor I of him through all eternity. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. This is one of the most beautiful passages in the year. It's wonderful to meditate on this one. And when it's referring to the king, the little passage that goes before that is God saying to these same devotees, inherit the kingdom that has been prepared for you since the foundation of the world. So this indicates what a long journey we each have this soul journey that goes on life after life after life. Why? So that we can purify our hearts in order to see God everywhere, in order to learn discrimination so that we can make the right choices in life, we can do the right things, and seeing God everywhere, serving Him everywhere. And then we will inherit that kingdom that has been ours, that God has prepared for us since the foundation of the world. That's our destiny. That's what we're headed towards. That's what it's, even though it seems like it's a long way off sometimes, still, that's what we were made for. That's the reason that we live, to learn those lessons and be able to claim our birthright. And we wanted to sing that beautiful chant of Masters, when my dream's dream is done. Serving Mother where she sleeps. You know, you look around this world, as we all do, we keep track of the politics and the virus and all the things that are happening in this world. And it's easy to be a little bit intimidated. All the things that are going on. And I ran across something that St. Teresa of Avila said. And she lived in the 1500s when the Spanish Inquisition was happening, so it was a pretty rough time. And her comment about it all was, all times are dangerous. And so we shouldn't feel put upon because, oh dear, we're having to deal with a pandemic. People dealt with the Black Plague, and somehow some of us made it through, and we have to be strong. Yogananda used to say that children should not be coddled. They shouldn't be, it has to be just the right temperature and not too hot and not too cold, and they always have to have the right shoes on, and they always have to have the proper gear and all this stuff. And he said, as a child, I used to meditate on the burning sands in the hot sun just to make myself strong, just to make myself realize that I am not this body. And so in life, we need to have courage. We need to be strong and not be swayed and discouraged by all the things that are happening in the world. We need to be a force for good, for calmness, for peace in this world. I love this story from Autobiography of a Yogi. Doesn't the Lord's name sound sweet from all lips, ignorant and wise? So there's not a lot of people saying God's name at all in this world. But let our voice be a voice saying God's name. There's a lot of ignorance, there's a lot of meanness, there's a lot of derangement, really, out there in the world. But if we look at all of those things that are happening, all of those people through which they are coming, and realize the truth that each one is God in training, just as we are. We're all learning, we're all growing, we're all making mistakes, but that's okay. Mistakes happen so that we can learn from them. Swami Kriyananda, we'll just paraphrase this, but he has a wonderful way of explaining karma. And he says Karma is God's loving hand showing us what right action is and what wrong action is. That's all it is. It's not to think, oh my God, my karma is overwhelming and it's horrible and I'll never get out from under it. You will. And what's the way to do that? Service. Service purifies. That beautiful story that Dharmadas told last week about the man who had been a murderer and a thief and had done all kinds of horrible things and finally woke up to just how horrible it felt, how disgusting it felt to have all that energy around him of death and meanness and hatred. And I don't know if he told that part of the story, but he ran. He left his whole bad, horrible life and his associates who were like demons. He left them and he ran with nothing. He took nothing with him. He ran for 60 miles without stopping, just to get away from the horrible energy that he had felt. And God led him to a temple. He collapsed right in front of a temple. And when we err, when we do things, we go, oh, I can't believe I did that again. Run from it into the divine presence. That's the way to live in this world. If we're overwhelmed by the negativity, the pain, the fear, the anxiety, all the things that are happening. I've read articles about how mental illness has really come up during the pandemic because of anxiety and not being able to be with people who lift our spirits. When we get into that state, the only cure for it is the presence of God. Brother Lawrence, who lived in the 1600s, there's a collection of his letters and sayings called Practicing the Presence of God. And Brother Lawrence was not a scholar. He was not one to study the scriptures and all of that. He worked in the kitchen. He was a decalcid Carmelite, which is what St. Teresa of Avila started. That was her order, thank you. And so here in the next century is Brother Lawrence working in the kitchen. I think he worked there for 30 or 40 years. And his way was to practice being with God all the time, sharing every experience, especially every problem, every trouble, every fear, but not only that, but just asking, God, what should I do with this pot of porridge or whatever it is? Lord, be with me in everything. I had to make a long drive the other day, and I was praying almost the whole time, just to be safe, to get home quickly, to have everyone around me be safe. And I thought, I should live this way every moment. Because by the time I got home, I was feeling God's presence in everything. If we live like that, there's no time to fear. There's no time for anxiety. We're just in that presence. So I wanted to close just by reading some of the rest of the passages that go with this beautiful Gita reading. I'll read it again. One who beholds my presence everywhere and all things dwelling equally in me, he never loses loving sight of me, nor I of him through all eternity. So we can have that connectedness. All we have to do is keep our thoughts, our minds on God. And the next passage, which Swami doesn't quote here, that yogi finds security in me, who, though his days be rushed and action-filled, is anchored inwardly at rest in me and worships me in every living form. So if we can stay in that spirit, no matter how rushed or action-packed the days are, then we will have our security in God. That one Arjuna is the best of men and truest he of yogis, whose heart feels the joys of all, their pains, their searing griefs, with equal care as though they were his own. So that kingdom will be ours as soon as we perfect our compassion and our love for God in everyone.
This passage reminded me of how, I mentioned this in the fire ceremony earlier, but I'll just expand on it a little bit, that to live in the presence of God is to live in the presence of light. And obviously in the fire ceremony, we're celebrating the light and we're tuning into the light that is represented by the fire, but also, of course, the inner light, and learning to recognize that light all around us. As Nirmala was describing, how if we're going to live in the presence of God, we need to learn to see God everywhere. We need to learn to see God in everyone, whether ignorant or wise. That sweet little passage where Yogananda is talking about his own silent criticism of this group of men chanting, violently reciting a chant with drum and cymbal. You know, the interesting thing about that is that, yes, they were violently reciting the chant, so I probably sounded pretty bad or something to that effect. I mean, the energy of it was probably a little off in some way or another. But here's the interesting thing. Most people probably walked right by and didn't even notice. I mean, India and a railway station in India is a pretty wild, noisy place. The fact that some guys are over in the corner chanting, for most people is sort of irrelevant. Well, it wasn't for Yogananda. At least he turned and he tuned into the fact that they were reciting God's name, albeit not in a very great way, okay. But at least his mind was over there. And it's so dear that Master Mahashaya came up and gave him a little scolding in his loving way, and then just reached his arm around him and said, isn't it sweet, no matter how it sounds? I mean, at least they're chanting God's name. And Master was carried along to the merciful presence by that loving gesture. Well, all of us would do well to look for that presence in the world, in our lives, and try to see it, try to tune into it, because we are all of us making a movie. The movie of our life, yes. But if you will ask yourself this question, and it's probably a question you've never thought of before, at least in this context, what if your gift to the world was a movie? What if you were going to make a movie and that was going to be your legacy to the world? What would that movie be? What would it be about? How would you frame it? How would you show it? I had the privilege of many years ago of helping to build the colonnade at Crystal Hermitage. So you walk down the stairs, you come to these big, beautiful, kind of Grecian-looking columns with, my job was to put the trellis over the top of it so the wisteria could grow on top of it. And it's a fascinating thing to note that, I mean, the view is staggering at that spot. You know, you're finally seeing the enormity of the view beyond Crystal Hermitage. But you see it more energetically, more dynamically, because there are these columns that frame that view for you. They sort of define, okay, here's one look, and over here is another look. Well, that movie of our lives, or the movie that we make with our lives, is another way of framing this universe. And how do we frame it? We frame it with meaning. We frame it with love and attention. In Swamiji's amazing book, The Art and Science of Raja Yoga, because we teach this course every year, and we'll be starting it again in January, we go through the book another time, once a year or even more. And every time there's a little gem, or there's 100 little gems that we never noticed or we never sort of appreciated. And so one of these gems popped out at me last year. And Swamiji is talking about the importance of awareness as we're practicing yoga. And, you know, if you're practicing the half moon pose or the tree pose, you know, you're focusing on the awareness of the body, the balance, the stretching of the muscles, the etc. You know, the movement of energy. But then he goes on to say, trace that awareness back to its origin, and you will find God. That awareness in us is God's presence in us. And it was like the light went on. It was like, wait a minute. God's presence inside of me is awareness? I mean, it sounds kind of like porridge without spice in it or something. It's kind of like, wait a minute, how is awareness divine? But awareness itself is what God is. Awareness itself is joy. It's just that when we pour that awareness out into the world of senses, we get back whatever we put out. So if we are tuning into the sparkling new car or the sparkling diamond or whatever, we get all excited by that thing because we've poured excitement towards it, and some of it bounces back to us. And so, you know, we get all excited. And if we get discouraged or anxious or afraid or angry or whatever, we pour that into the world, and then the circumstances arrange themselves and some of it bounces back to us and we get that reinforcement as well. Which movie will we make? Will we make a drama, a romance, a comedy, a thriller, a horror movie? I hope not. You know what I mean? But we all have that choice, God-given. How will we make the movie that we will share with the entire world? What message will it convey? What music will it have in it? What kind of cinematography will be there? We all have that choice. And so feel in your heart what presence of God inspires me the most deeply. Where do I feel God's presence the most? And how can I serve that presence most lovingly in everyone that I meet? There's a famous, in the world of football, a very famous player, was one of the greatest who ever played the game. His name was Walter Payton. And he had an interesting quotation that touches loosely on this subject. He said, "When you're good, you tell everyone. When you're great, everyone tells you." And it's an interesting, so from the standpoint of worldly goodness or worldly greatness, a lot of people are good, and so they spend their whole life telling the world, "See, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good, really, I'm good." And when someone becomes great, it's not the person specifically, it's the fact that they are manifesting love and devotion and focused energy to the point where there's no them left anymore. If there's too much ego there, there isn't true greatness. This is a point that Swamiji made in his book, The Artist, it was first called The Artist as a Channel, and later it was called Art as a Hidden Message. And one of the things that he brought out in that book is that art is a sharing. And if there's too much ego in it, then it's like the message is a little clouded by that ego. But if it's true and it's pure, then you get the pure feeling of the inspiration without the clouding of the ego around it. And so in this passage in the Bible, God is speaking to the quote, elect, and he's saying, welcome to the kingdom, as Nirmala pointed out, that has been prepared to you since before the creation of the world. Welcome home, in other words, when you served me, you fed me when I was naked, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they all asked him, when did we do it? We didn't never notice that we were doing it. Well, why didn't they notice? Because they were so busy doing it. There was no reason to think that there was anything super special about it. It just was the outpouring of their own natural love and devotion. And that's the place that we all have to get to at some point, is it's just a flow. We saw this with Swamiji. We've seen it now with others as well. I mentioned some weeks ago that dear Guru Bai of ours, mother of us all in many ways, Seva, passed away. And her name means service. Seva means divine service. And she was doing divine service to the last 5-10 minutes of her life, literally until the last 5-10 minutes of her life. And then she walked home and she wasn't feeling well and she left the body. And that was it. And we all could aspire to serve and love in whatever way God gives us to do. It can be humble, it can be grand, it can be whatever it is. If it's ours, then it will be real. It will have that fire of passionate devotion. Passion maybe is the wrong word, but it'll have that spark of our own connection to the divine. Swamiji gave us so much amazing music, so many amazing books and stories and words. He was busy, and also gave us thousands and thousands of incredible photographs. He framed the world for us. Yes, in the colonnaded Crystal Hermitage, but also he just gave us a way of seeing God is here. He did a slideshow once. Nirmala worked on this way back in the 1980s called Different Worlds. And the different worlds were not, Pluto and, Andromeda or something. They were people in different states of consciousness. And it's an amazing, beautiful flow of consciousness. I mean, not all of it is beautiful, because you see people who are very worldly, some of them, and you see the pain and the dissatisfaction on their faces. And then you see these saintly people. Oh my goodness. And they come from, he's in Jerusalem and he's taking pictures of a rabbi who's got light. I mean, there's just power there. And some monk. It's just, when it's real, it's real. It doesn't matter which kind of clothing they're wearing or which tradition they came from. It's that connectedness that conveys it for us. So in the days that come, and we're in the holiday season now, the end of the year is coming, find that connection, whatever way calls you the most deeply. We'll celebrate the all-day meditation a week from Thursday. We'll have to do it online this year again, unfortunately, but let's make it be fortunate this time also, because it's an amazing day to dedicate to God, 8 to 4, 8 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon. But whatever way we can find to deepen that connection, we will know the fulfillment of that. We too, in our own way, in our own time, will be welcomed into that kingdom that has been prepared for us since before the dawn of time. Namaste.